So, welcome to everyone on the other side. I'm Jill McCauley. I am the COO of Behavioral Essentials. And today we are going to talk about being a woman in executive leadership in this month and day that celebrates us. And our panelists, I will introduce in a moment to you. We are going to have a discussion and our chat will be live. So I encourage everyone to pepper us with questions, respond to us. We will have time at the end for Q&A, but let me just get into our agenda. What we want to do is just kind of, again, welcome you. We'll introduce ourselves. We're going to talk about our journeys together. We're going to talk about leadership and turning points and the journey in identity. And we're going to, let me just make sure everything is working okay. And then we are also going to connect on what are we going to do about here forward and the opportunities ahead of us. And again, go into some Q&A and talk about next steps after that. With that being said, for those of you who have come to us as a new friend, a new colleague out there in the world, a woman in solidarity with us, or a male colleague joining in championing the journey of women in the workplace, introducing you to Behavioral Essentials. We are a workforce development company that leans into awareness as a catalyst for all. So our work hits on the individual level, the team level, and the organizational level, using our platforms that generate greater awareness, from the E3 to blind spotting, to help people propel into greater understanding of themselves, greater understanding of their teams and their organization, so that we can grow and develop and have great success with a lot of happiness along the way. So that being said, our work hits on using the platform for helping people understand themselves, behavioral benchmarking for finding candidates that align behaviorally, and then coaching across the trajectory, and then our marquee product of blind spotting in conjunction with Harvard Business Review Press, and the new book launched written by Martin Dubin, Blind Spotting. Now, more importantly, who is on the Zoom with us today? We have Courtney Rice, the COO of A&F. Courtney, I would love for you to just tell a little bit about yourself and why you said yes to this panel.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Jill. I think that I said yes because I love women in business and women in life. And I think our struggles and our successes are both things we should celebrate. And so I like being around others to learn from. I will say just really briefly that whenever anybody says, like, how did you get here and what are you doing? I was going to be a fifth grade teacher and a mom. That's what I set out on my path to do at 10 years old. And I am not a fifth grade teacher, but my one and only son turns 20 today at 12:34. So I did accomplish the being a mom, but I think the teacher part was probably more that I have an obsession with curiosity and learning and mentoring. And I think that leadership has kind of allowed me to do those things. It's just not in a classroom and summers off. So it's kind of how I got where I am today.
Wonderful. Mary Beth. Mary Beth is a longtime executive from Full Sail University and now has made the leap into starting her own business, Life and Leadership Essentials. Please share, Mary Beth, a little bit more about yourself and why you said yes to today.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Jill, and all who are here for being here and showing up. I am very, very excited to be here with you. And the reason why I said yes is I love pouring into women leaders. You know, at Full Sail, we had a women's leadership initiative for many years, and mentoring women is one of the things I love to do. And so now, as a coach and a consultant after Full Sail University, I'm just a woman leader who likes to help other women leaders. So really excited to be here today. Thanks again.
Thank you. and Jana. Jana comes to us also from the Midwest, Courtney, based in Ohio as well. Jana is director of coaching from Ironworks Team Consulting. And Jana, just give us a little bit of background about yourself and why you said yes.
Yeah, I said yeah. Well, thank you again also, I think for sure. But I really wanted to say yes today because if I wasn't here as a panelist, I would be here as an attendee. That I think that these conversations are so important. And coming from an industry, we were all chatting in the backstage of this group that my industry is very male dominated. And so, in the industry I work in with our clients. And so, any opportunity really to be around other women and learn from them and share what we have learned makes us all better. And I think ironworks itself comes from the Proverbs passage of the idea of iron sharpening iron, and that's very much part of our core values. So this is an opportunity to do so and sharpen some iron and be sharpened myself. So that's why I'm here.
Wonderful. Just because I think it's a very interesting statistic, I'll bring it forward right now. What Jan and I and us, we were talking about backstage is Jana's world is in the financial advising. And I saw a statistic today that in the 90s, about only 20% of women were financial advisors. And actually today in 2026, only 20% of women are financial advisors still. So it's just an interesting piece to, there are industries where there's definitely more and more of a presence of women in leadership, but there is other industries where the odds are few and far between. And so as we think about that in the conversation and the questions I will be asking our panelists and diving into with them, it's set up where I will ask them questions and they will respond not only to the questions, but to each other. And we're going to have some discussion and we're going to hopefully have some fun along the way. But our hope and our objective of this is the opportunity for connection, the opportunity for a community, the opportunity to foster reflection in a way that shares stories and lessons learned. So if one of us happens to be in a place a couple steps ahead of you, you can see yourself, you can see the path. You also know that you're not alone on any one of these journeys. While none of our paths are directly the same, there's an opportunity to know that others are out there trudging along, wearing multiple hats, multiple roles, navigating still some societal, I guess probably forevermore, societal influences of this journey. But again, the biggest thing is we're not alone. We're a community together, and we really do truly hope that in the stories shared today, there is nuggets of like, that's me, I see myself, and also like, I can use that. That's a good reminder for me. That's a tool in my tool belt. So as we get into that, I'm gonna move this along. So we're gonna shift over to our panel discussion. I'm gonna just hide the deck for now. And the other piece is too, I very much, Courtney, Jana, and Mary Beth want to ground this conversation not in your identity or title, because we're much more than that. And we're much more complex than any of our titles. So as we go on this journey, we are humans. And that is part of why we called the session The Whole Woman, because we're a whole person. And what we are at home, in our relationships with our friends, and in the workplace, it is all intertwined and we're all interconnected in that journey. So with that, I want to jump over to you, Courtney, first, and then we'll follow up with Mary Beth. Let's talk about how you got on the leadership journey. I know, Courtney, you gave us a little insight of that fifth grade teacher opportunity, but talk to us about how you got to where you are at A&F today.
Sure. I believe, and I know it's not very exciting, I'm super lucky, and I don't take that for granted. I often say that I was given an incredible runway in life. My past was very easy. Life was good. It was not hard for me, and it put me in a lot of places that I was lucky. I was around smart people. I was a sponge. And I know that that is my experience. And when we talk about blind spotting, the number one thing I've had to remember my entire life is all of our runways don't look alike. And And I take nuggets from things on my runway that are free for me to use and share with other people. And I feel like that's been sort of spots where I can make connections with other people I've worked with. If there was something I got because I sat at a dinner table and got it and they didn't have it at their dinner table, no harm in me kind of sharing what I learned at my dinner table, and it's free knowledge, and then now it's part of their runway. So I will say that I've been very lucky. However, with my luck, I think came a lot of responsibility, and the people who helped make me kind of lucky also had a high level of accountability, and they said, listen anywhere you can, ask questions wherever you can, and curiosity was nurtured always. And I've always taken the opportunity to be very curious and sometimes very inappropriately. I think I was very young asking older people things I may not have, shouldn't have. Well, lesson learned now, but it did really help on my journey. And I think that's what I've refined over my whole career, that stay curious, surround yourself with people who are willing to nourish and nurture your curiosity, and luck will find you in places that you never thought you may have been able to go. So, and then in my life, I try my hardest, like I said, to really people who may not be as lucky or where life looks a little different, to share some of that along the journey. So it's kind of how I got where I got. I've also worked really, really hard. And I think that probably is the hard part, is probably the overcompensation sometimes for either luck or, you're with people who are there from, sometimes people get to places from being given it. And I have to work really, really hard to prove that I belong there. So kind of what I've learned along the way and why I think I've gotten where I've gotten.
Thank you. Mary Beth, tell us a little bit about your runway and that journey that's led you to where you are.
Sure. The first thing I'll say about the runway is I remember very early on in my career at Full Sail University where I wanted to work for the founder and the CEO. And so I was like in my 20s and said, you know what? I'm just going to make an appointment with him and to let him know what I wanted to do. So, funny enough, though, when I met with him, I got the appointment, met with him, and I said, I'd really love to work with you. I just love what you're doing over here. And he was the founder, but he was in charge of admissions at the time. And he said, okay. And so a few months later, he had made some changes and I got the gig. I got to be in leadership, and it was something that I wanted to do. And I don't know what possessed me, but I would say if you have a calling, I'd say go for it. I've done that on a couple of times in my career where if you want to do something, what else is stopping you? The worst that can happen is we get a no,
Mm,
and that still is something that we learn from.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's I've had a very similar piece, even just listening to Courtney. She's like, now I perhaps ask questions I might have seen as inappropriate, but maybe they weren't even inappropriate, or it
Yeah.
wasn't, because the stories of people just kind of getting the courage to press send on an invite or a meeting or an email or a call, it has definitely led me in my career, which I didn't even know my career existed when I was in college. Like I was like, I'm gonna go and be a psychologist, and got my master's, and I was like, what do I do with this? I wasn't oriented to one-on-one psychotherapy. Um, Unfortunately, I came out with a degree and was like, eek, I don't like this. So I just started talking to people and found myself at a consulting firm with zoos and aquariums. Didn't know that thing existed. And then met a random other psychologist who happened to have a firm called Behavioral Essentials that was partnering in the same industry. And I was like, this is fun. So that I would say that piece of exploration and curiosity is very much part of it. And it's also navigating the doubt in our heads, is the biggest challenge, I think, on any of our runways. And I'll come back to what Courtney said about listening. It's listening externally, and then what Mary Beth said, listening internally on what do we hear, kind of our calling to be, what do we want. Mary Beth, talk about the transition from Full Sail to what you're doing now.
Oh, sure. Well, it's similar insofar as, I was a leader at Full Sail developing others, and I feel like it's the same in that respect. There's been no change at all. Pouring into others and developing them is what I have a passion for and what I continue to do. And then the things that are different is I didn't realize all that entails being a solopreneur and all the hard work. There aren't teams of people to help me build marketing campaigns or anything like that. So it's definitely a large difference, but one, if you go into anything new in with the mindset of I'm here to learn, it can be and it has been a great transition.
Courtney, flipping back to you, I know you didn't mention this directly, but with the knowledge you are new to your role at ANF, one of the things we often experience before a transition is, am I ready? Am I ready? Is this right? And so not knowing that, I actually don't even know your full background, but just in that journey of getting to being the COO of ANF, what was the story you were telling yourself on the readiness?
Yeah, good question. I did have the luxury of doing a contract before came into this role because I think both ANF and I wanted to kind of see what was at play. So that is the benefit, which I do really recommend. Call it the gig economy, but being able to contract or consult and get your feet into something before you take it on full throttle is probably a good opportunity if you can. But I think that the concept of like curiosity, which I'm clearly obsessed with, but curiosity is what always tells me like, show me the big picture, show me all the things, what's good, what's bad, and not the old pro con list of boyfriends in third grade, but similar of what does this look like? And I think what I had to do is say, not can I be successful at this? That's important, but can I matter in like, will it matter to me what I'm doing? And it did. So if I failed, I wasn't going to be a failure is kind of how I came at it. Like if the metrics we used didn't deliver, that's not good and I probably would lose my job. Fine. But I wanted to make sure I mattered. And it's very important to me. I'm obsessed with teaching and learning in whatever I do. And I knew enough about this business, but there was still enough for me to say I'm going to learn, which was important. And then I knew there were people I could teach things that I had learned along the way. And so it made it exciting. If I had approached it and not seen the opportunity to teach and learn or matter, I probably would not have considered it. So the KPIs of what the business needs is the given that has to happen, but the how we go about it is much more important or interesting to me. And it's definitely, I'm learning something every 5 seconds and good, bad, or ugly, but yeah.
Just remind us, how long have you been on the job now?
Yeah, so I started here on December 1st.
So,
yeah.
just for those of you listening, it is
yes.
not very long.
No. Yeah. Yep.
Wonderful. As we keep going in this conversation, Jana brought up an interesting thing as we were prepping for this dialogue. She goes, I had a visceral reaction to a number of these questions. I want to know, Jana, what does it mean as you thought about joining this webinar and a visceral, positive, negative, like angry at the questions themselves? What was going on?
They just called to me, Jill. I think that's the biggest thing truly is like, we talk a lot about, and I know that everyone who's part of this today isn't seeing everything that we're going to talk about, and we'll get to all of these places, of course, but, just being primed to open up this floor for conversation. Some of the things that we are talking about today are the things that we encounter in coaching some of the women in the industry we're working in. And so having this be top of mind for us on a regular, consistent basis with those that we're coaching all the more feedback, all the more experience that we can all share and understand. And Courtney, I also am on a curious journey myself. So I'm curious of what everyone else is going to say to some of these things as well, because I know that these are important questions that we need to be asking. And that's, I think, where the visceral reaction came from, is going, oh, yes, I'm so glad they're asking this. And oh, that really hits on a pain point that we're seeing all the time. So that's kind of where my reaction came from.
Courtney, do you have something to say? Okay. I want to go back in time for each one of you. There is a level of leadership the three of you are at now in your career that was different. As Mary Beth talks about, 30 plus years ago, saying to the founder of Full Sail, I want to work for you, as a 20-year-old, it's journey's taken on. But in the shift of going back in time for when you were kind of a doer, a contributor, you were not a leader of leaders yet. Talk to me, just kind of go back in time a little bit and think about a moment where that transition from your success being built on being a really good doer. So Courtney, you talked about hard work. Like there's a level of Jana that I know, she just gets stuff done. Like, and even in the years of Full Sail's growth, like it was not what it was when Mary Beth started there. And so go back to like when you hung your hat and you're like, I'm a really good doer. And that shift from no longer doing it to being a leader of doers. I'll turn it to anyone to answer that first.
I'll hop in just for a second. That I had an epiphany long ago when I was like, I want to be a manager. I want to be in management, because that was the job post on the board. And I was like, management tells people what to do, and then all of it gets done. It's awesome. It's checklists. I'm like wired that way. This is so fun. And I'm like, I'm gonna be a manager. I'm gonna be a manager. And then I was a manager, and we made checklists, and things sometimes got done, and people hated me or hated each other, and it was not so much fun. And then I watched this guy who didn't do much, and everybody liked him. He was super well respected, and so much stuff got done, and even stuff got taken off the list that shouldn't be done. And then it was fascinating, and I was like, he's a really good manager. And I remember saying this to somebody, and they're like, he didn't do much. He wasn't a taskmaster. Managers manage tasks and processes. Leaders lead people, and the people versus the process is where you should really keep your eyes. And I was like, oh gosh, okay. Leaders lead people, managers manage processes. And I've had this it's probably been 20 years ago I heard this, but however, I've worked in small business, enterprise business, small business, and that's the biggest challenge, is that I naturally know that my natural state's to lead, and I believe it's important. Coming in and out of businesses or in and out of projects, I do have to, my blind spot again is today you need to do, because there's stuff that has to get done and we have to, but make sure you fix whatever or get it situated such that you can now lead people into a comfortable place. And so like today I'm doing a bunch of doing this very minute, because we have some stuff we got to figure out so that my leaders can actually be set up for success. And I think that that's what I kind of have to keep in my head all the time is, are you staying in this tranche forever? Because if so, they're all just going to be sitting around thinking you're nuts. Or can you help them grow as leaders by, moving away from management and into leadership? So that's the dichotomy of the two is kind of what I always have to keep in front of me, and thankfully learned it a long time ago, but it's definitely a blind spot to keep my eye on for sure.
Courtney, I made a note of that heading into this too, that the idea of processes versus people, I think resonates with me so much, because we help the teams that we work with build processes also, but you can't out process a process. You have to have the people that run it, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it can be as fractured. The process can be as fractured as it needs to be. If you have good people, the process is still going to run.
Yeah.
So if you are not leading the people who can lead the charge to work through some of those issues, take those pieces and make it happen, you can put the most amazing process together. But if you don't have the people to do it, unless you are an automation company, then you're not going to have that happen. So
Yeah.
I love that you said that. And I totally agree. And the level of leadership that we're talking about today really does come down to how are you helping the people that are making the machine run?
Mhm.
And that's the biggest thing for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I remember a behavioral essentials coach telling me mid-career, Mary Beth, you are a human being, not a human doing. You need to do less, lead more, do less. And so, that was a big transition for me to realize, and exactly what you both were saying, Jana and Courtney, you've got to develop the people and the systems and the processes to allow things to run without you.
Mhm.
I'm actually a very new leader of humans because majority of my career I was a consultant and I led teams, but not having like teams report up to me. So in full honesty, the shift to behavioral essentials from more to traditional strategic and business consulting, where I was a little bit like out on my own doing the projects. Sometimes there's a project team, sometimes it was just me. Um, it was very startling to go to the fact that like I'm not doing the work anymore. There's people doing the work, and I actually had a bit of an identity crisis because I was like, I had again hung my hat on that I was the consultant, I was the strategist, I was the planner. And there's elements of the role I have today that I get to play with strategy, play with planning, play. Um, but the other bigger piece, and I know BET members are on this, is like there's people looking up at me for the first time, and the vulnerability of no, like I know what the gaps I saw in my bosses were.
Mhm.
And now I have people seeing gaps in those that I lead, or like seeing I'm their leader and they're seeing my blind spots, my gaps when I lean onto my strengths, which is usually just moving too fast. If you can
Mhm.
imagine that. And so that was a very uncomfortable place. And because I was now no longer successful at what I had been, and I was now back to being a novice and feeling on very unsteady ground as I made that shift. As we think about that, Courtney, I'm going to ask you to think about what did you have to unlearn to be the leader you are today?
Yeah. Um, it- so
You
the
go,
answer to
go
this
for it.
question is certainly no. So one of the things that I think is, I'm going to answer your question, but one of the things I think is important in leadership is that the people who you're leading and behavioral essentials, um, I'm plugging, whatever, but those kinds of tools didn't exist. Maybe they existed, whatever. But earlier on in my career, I was like, I'm going to ask you some questions during an interview and maybe I'll do this weird box thing. And I don't know. We did things to hope we were picking with the right people. And then we were just going to like make sure they could do the job without taking into it any sort of psychology if they ever really could, if they were well positioned. And I think this idea of leadership is a whole lot more successful if the people you're leading are in good spots for them or are aware of where their blind spots are and you can play to that. And the more and more conversation has to happen, I believe, around bringing that stuff up. I love to have conversations with people and say, guys, look, here's my assessment. This is going to keep happening. Your job's the honest and truth committee. You need to be honest with me and say, slow your roll. You can go that fast. We cannot. And I think being candid about who you are, your traits, your DNA, how you're wired with the people you're leading is very, very helpful. And from a long-winded, from an unlearning standpoint, I think I had to unlearn that the 1990s way of recruiting and hiring and leading people is doesn't work and that there's way more resources available today to get the right people in the right places. And when you're candid about your own traits and the way you lead and you put it out there, I feel like people are much more inclined to give you honest feedback and keep you accountable. I mean, it's not, I always say that the feedback, I always welcome it. And very rarely is it a news flash. It's just like, oh gosh, oh yeah, okay, sorry. And I have to do a post-it note or do something to just keep myself in check. Um, but I do think like unlearning old ways of what leadership, in the 80s and 90s was, I think is important for the future, especially the people we're leading these days. So.
Courtney and Mary Beth, I'm curious for you guys when I hear you say that, Courtney and Mary Beth, some of the things you've said. I think part of it too, from a leadership perspective, and tell me if you guys feel this way, is it's also learning how to, like, when it's the unlearning, learning part of it is like releasing control. But I think there's some of that where it's like, it's so hard to do that because you have to be able to delegate, right? Like everything you both have said is the like empowerment, the delegation of everyone that you are coaching and working with and developing on your team. That's what you're doing is you're developing them, right? And so having that sort of outcome focused recognition that they may have the better idea of how to get something done, and you have to release control of when you've been the doer, and especially as you move up in something, you may have done it a certain way in the past, but that's been hard for me. It's not always easy to do that.
Preach, sister.
Yes, wholeheartedly agree. I feel like I had to learn how to put the armor down, which is like I used to show up every day as I'm impenetrable, and nothing's going to happen to me, and then as a as you ride up in leadership or rise up in leadership, you need to show more vulnerability so that others are able to be more of themselves and bring themselves to work as opposed to a version that you think that other people want, so
Our dear friend Brene Brown would be
Mm.
absolutely, who doesn't love Brene?
Who doesn't?
She's my friend from far away. She doesn't know me. I actually just listened to her on a recent podcast talk about that exact same concept that you brought forward, Courtney, that links to, she uses the word armor a lot because she says the exact opposite. The enemy of vulnerability is self-protection. And so when we go into self-protection mode, we have put the armor on, and therefore we have stopped being our full selves. And so, and that lens of, and the key to it is we can't always see when we're wearing armor, but our teams can. And so that's when we're all in it together. We're all sitting around the table working to lift the organization together. And there are going to be moments where each one of us goes to defensive or has a blind spot coming up. And not only Brené, but neuroscience will say we can't see all the things. And so we need people around us to help us see and think better. Like business is not a solo sport. So why would we be trying to do it all ourselves and saying, I know the best? Because it comes back down to what Jenna said, control.
Yeah.
And feeling a loss of control. No one likes it, but there's so much more control gained when you actually then give up the control. And it's a different type of control because it's influence, not sticks and carrots.
Yeah.
Jana, talk to us about your leadership identity and how it's grown and changed over the years.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me has just been the awareness that it is not linear. I always thought it would be a very, like, I start here, I move up here, the corporate ladder, right? But I've never really been in corporate. So just to say that in my experience, but we are a team of two, started as a team of two, myself and the founder of our business. And we now have a third. Bringing in that third was an interesting dynamic because if it was very simple to go, well, if it's not you, it's me, right? And so if there's that dynamic, then that was something that, and as my role expanded, going back to the idea of leading people, right? I had somebody else that was really under our umbrage that we were helping to develop and be our support system. So I think that's a huge piece of it for me in my journey, has just been the fact that as you add complexity, the problems become different. And I think that's a big piece of it.
Mhm.
I would also say, and that idea of it not being linear is that I feel like one of the biggest assets that someone can bring to the table, women or otherwise, is the idea of being a chameleon. That I think through profile assessments and things like that, sure, you can get to know if you have those resources, but yet reading people and understanding body language and pulling from circumstances that you've experienced in the past is so helpful to know when you need to pause, know when you need to be quiet for a second, know when it's time to listen, know when it's time to lead. And so understanding that chameleon in terms of your abilities, but also understanding the types of people that you work with are going to be so different. We're all unique whole individuals, right? And so for me, that has been a luxury that I've had in the business that we're in, with it just being the three of us. We're a women-led business, which is cool in and of itself. But we also have the luxury to kind of design our roles how we want them. I get that not everybody on this call is going to have that luxury. But one of the things when we go way back to the beginning of this, talking about our roadmap, is I've been very convicted in my values from the very start. And so it doesn't mean that just because I don't align politically, socially, in ideas with somebody else doesn't mean that I can't work with them. It's just an understanding of when is the time to be a little more vocal, when is the time to sit back, when is the time to pull that out of my tool belt, right? And being able to know that that's available to me in my skill set. So I would say that is one of the biggest things in terms of role kind of expansion and how that's changed for me, is just over time getting that experience. That is one of the most, I would say, used things in my tool belt that I use on a daily basis. Especially going back to sharing again, we're in a male dominated industry with a lot of guys that are not always aligned with how I feel about certain things. And so when can I be quiet and just take it for what it is and we move on? And then where is there an opportunity to share input and bring a different perspective? So I think that chameleon nature has been incredibly valuable to me. And I think it's incredibly valuable in business. And as your role transitions, knowing that the skill set that you had today is maybe not what you have to use and pull out of your tool belt. Doesn't mean you don't use it or have it anymore. You just might not use it as often.
I want to build upon that, and then we have a question in the chat here next. But it is interesting. One of the things, again, using our tools, there are people with very extreme behavioral tendencies. So it's harder to do exactly what you're saying, Jana, of like dial it up or dial it back, because it's like, no, I am critical, or I am extroverted, or kind of like the very loud or very dominant, or like I'm very submissive. So dialing up the ability to take a little bit more control. But one of the things I've at least would challenge women on is making sure there's awareness that you are changing because of something, versus muting the real self. We often see it with people who have a number of very moderate scores on all of our behavioral scales, because you never know how they'll respond, because they have just said, I'm just going to respond to the situation. Who are you? So there is a pro con to, like, I do agree with you. They're having awareness and thinking about when is the time for me to kind of just like wave this flag loud and proud, and where is the time where I sit back and I adjust, but also never losing yourself. So you said it, like, your values, Jana. And so for the women that are perhaps a little bit less confident than the four of us on this call, you have beauty in that humbleness, you have beauty in that grace and that team oriented, but make sure you know when you are changing yourself, because that's a version of armor. That's a version of, if you're losing who I am in order to please an external relationship.
I totally agree. And I think the one thing that comes to mind for me as you say that, Jill, is, and Courtney brought this up when she talked about like her teacher, like thought I would be a teacher and thought it was going to be this. And Jill, you said, right, like I didn't even know that my job existed when I was in college. I didn't either. And so I think it's one of those things that we live in a world today where a lot of people, it takes time, it takes some access. And I understand that it's not a perfect science to this, but if you are somebody who has a stronger profile or stronger traits, BE talks about adaptability. It's the idea of how adaptable are you willing to be? And if you are not willing to be adaptable, go find something that allows you to pursue your passions and be who you want to be. This is not the, 70s and 80s where everyone's a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer, you're in sales, or you're a blue collar person, right? Like that doesn't exist anymore. There's so many things out there that require different skill sets, different personalities. And if you have the ability to go out and seek out those opportunities, go find them. Like find the thing that allows you to be your most authentic self, because it's going to be the thing that you are going to enjoy probably the most. So if you're always having to, like, I think Jill, you said the word mute, like muting yourself for the sake of the business versus becoming somebody different, like no one wants to live in a world where you can't be yourself. So the more that you find something that allows you to be your person who you are at home, at work, and vice versa, your most authentic self, if you can find that opportunity, then it's going to be a really good thing. So those opportunities are out there. You just have to find them and go seek them. If it's something that you realize is out of alignment of your values, I can't do this anymore. Maybe you keep your job for a little bit longer while you're hunting for something else. Doesn't mean that you just have to throw up your hands and quit, right? But how do you go find that thing that really aligns with your passions and aligns with your personality?
And that picks up on what Mary Beth brought forward too.
Yep.
It's all centered on awareness. Like the journey of finding yourself is never done. It's a practice. I still don't know who I am fully and where I'm going. But I wanted to pick up on this question from one of our participants. And she wrote in the chat, vulnerability in many organizations is not honored or promoted. What do you do? What do you feel keeps organizations from normalizing vulnerability as a leadership strength versus a risk? So I think the question here is there isn't always psychological safety to be yourself. And there isn't always an organization where you can be fully vulnerable. And there is still a lot of leadership that comes down with a thumb on the back of the neck and carrots and sticks in terms of how they lead for kind of command control, another way to say that. But I would love for the panelists to just kind of think about how in your actual work, you help organizations normalize vulnerability and understand its strength versus like let's go there.
I think the one thing I would say is by example, which is one of the things that I would say you can manage up or manage down. And it's as important to me to manage up with anybody I'm working, who's above me, that there is a bit of, if I'm choosing to be vulnerable and honest and candid and asking for you to criticize me if you perceive it as criticism, it starts to kind of change a little bit of how people see if again, I go back to the whole thing of like, where's your life before you got to this place, is that if vulnerability can have deep risk for a lot of people in their lives, regardless of where they are in their profession right now, that if you can see it in the healthy way, where vulnerability is actually a healthy, welcome trait and something that we honor and appreciate, and it makes us better, it becomes less of a bad word, I believe. Now, granted, that's all comes from, again, in a smaller setting. I mean, there's people who, they were vulnerable and then they got axed 2 days later. So, that can happen. But I think that there's I always believe anything I can do. My authentic self says that I am a vulnerable person. I am humble. I have humility, and tell me all the bad stuff because I can go do something about it, or I can cry, whatever. But and I think that if I had to be inauthentic and not be able to do that, it would be harder for me. So showing by example is really the only thing I know has worked for me.
Beautiful. I love, Jenna, something you brought up is authenticity. And I know, Courtney, you shared about that as well. Maybe, vulnerability is such an interesting word, and it's a word that we're not allowed to talk about in some organizations, right? People don't want you to, a command and control CEO doesn't necessarily want the word vulnerability being bandied about. But if you think of the word authenticity, like both you, Courtney and Jana, have spoken about, even open-mindedness, just showing what that looks like to people, and creating safety, it allows it to at least start to flourish. And as Janice said, if you then find yourself, you know what, this organization is not going to budge, then that's a sign for you to potentially move elsewhere.
I also like the word opportunity connected to it as well. That I think vulnerability is really an opportunity. And that's really what you're seeking, right? Is that feedback, that advice. So I think it's nuanced in how you bring it up, right? And what is vulnerable versus where do you see an opportunity for me? And allowing that feedback. But if you go seeking it, you have to be okay with what someone might say. And I think that's part of it too, is sometimes you're going to get the things that you don't want to hear. And it's the receptiveness to being open to some of that feedback too. So in all of our performance reviews that we do with some of our clients or do on their behalf, we use the phrase strengths and then opportunities. We don't use strengths and weaknesses. It's not a weakness. It's an opportunity. It may be vulnerable to talk about it, sure. But in that moment, you're really talking about the opportunity you have. And it's all about trying to get better and do the thing that you need to do to make yourself, however you want to be made in your image and the image of, those that are trying to get the outcomes from you that they really want. So I think it's an opportunity.
We got another question here in the chat, so we're going to dive into that. And panelists, I encourage you, as we think about also our prep for the conversation, if there's anything that we haven't yet touched on, let's just weave it into the responses of these questions. So the question from the attendee is, how can I navigate a boys club dynamic when we're technically at the same level, but decisions are being made in silos, and I'm navigating when to be quiet and when to advocate?
Yeah.
Anybody want to go first?
I can share, I'm sure we've all experienced that at one point in time in our career. And how they say men learn more about each other on the golf course. And so the only thing I have is, using men as advocates, getting a male as an advocate to sort of, shepherd you in toward the inner circle is one way. But just really networking, finding the networks within your organization and navigating them um, well is one suggestion.
I'm going to piggyback off what Mary Beth said of the idea of like the golf course, right? I think in general, there's an opportunity for men to be just better allies in general to women by recognizing all the other things that they're doing, which men are not great at doing. Let's just call it what it is, right? But I think when you are, the whole conversation today is around being your whole self, right? And so I know that I am bringing my best self into business when I am also being my best self at home and being able to have that blend. I'll give an example of what I mean by this. I know that there was a client that we were working with last week that said, I've been the CEO of my firm for 9 years. And we were in the car together with our firm founder, small business, you're only talking about 10 to 20 people, so not a huge corporation. They were in a car together driving to the airport. And he said, now you have 2 kids, right? And she's like, I've been here for 9 years. You don't know exactly how many kids I have, and you don't know their names. You don't know anything about them. There's something to finding the space for you to get to know each other on a non-business level that I think starts to make you part of the club more, because they know about each other. They understand men. They don't always understand women. So which that's like a whole separate conversation, right? So if you get into that opportunity, make that opportunity for yourself. Ask your CEO, ask your leader to go to lunch. Don't talk about business. Get to know them on a human level. Then it makes it easier for you to slide yourself into that position, right? Where, hey, maybe I talk about we have these synergies with our kids, we have this synergy with our activities. If you see me as this person that I am not, or someone that you don't know, it's easier to keep me out. If you start to get to know them on a human level, it's harder to keep you out at that point.
Well said, Jana. Courtney?
It's one of those things. I think about it all the time, but I don't know. I have no great wisdom. I'm a huge sports fan, and I have been since I was a little kid. And I grew up like on the sidelines so which this is so stereotypical and dumb, but there's this element of I'm wondering if I've had a more natural connection. Statistically, I don't have it, but there's some number that probably says lots of men like or know about sports, and I feel like I've had it as a connection point oftentimes. um but I now I'm just have some more things to be curious about. I'm curious if that's helped me over time have connections and find breakways into places. um I think there's also this weird, and I don't know if it's men or anything that feels like I'm outside of it. To me, that looks like something to like a challenge. And so then I try and figure out the penetration point, and it's, do I need to learn more about that group of people? I mean, I've been great, frankly, intimidated by groups of women who know how to play mahjong, frankly, right now. Like there's things where I'm like, it's a group of people who know something more than what I know, and I want to be on the inside. Then I go on the outside and try and learn about it to get on the inside. But I don't know. I'm gonna noodle on this of the penetration. Not sure.
I'll just tell you in my journey, even in so I started in the nonprofit consulting space. And so typically there's a more of a gender balance in
Mm.
nonprofits than for the betterment of that. But just it appears more of a gender balance in the workplace. Not always in the C-suite, but in the workplace. But I very much was navigating clients that because our work was in the C-suite layers, where dinners and outings and networking were all the men, and I was the female, and I often was, are you the girlfriend of my older boss? Are you the secretary? And I just leaned into that, and multiple times I was like, yeah, and this is what I do. So I just so that was my way of handling it, was like I just played with it to the benefit versus getting flustered. And when they would like, there's all sorts of, especially board members and kind of the older generation would say some colorful things, and so that's not the exact question we have here in the chat, but it was very much, I just would laugh it off and make sure I would stomp into the room and tell myself they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like I do. I put my pants on one leg at a time. And so I'm just going to sit down and fake it till I make it. And that was very much the way I navigated. And I still navigate any boys club. I'll just walk in and sit down and join you at the table.
I want to share one other thing really quick too. This may not be true for everyone, and it is not a blanket statement because this is not true of everyone, especially in your particular roles. But many women in general, men too, but most of the time women are more of the role that is brought up through the ranks of sort of like a climbing a ladder of some sort. You don't necessarily start in the role that you are in. Most men, unfortunately, get the job right off the bat. That's like they just got plugged in as COO somewhere along the way. Women have to kind of come up through the ranks, right? And so I think part of what is a barrier, and kind of what this question is alluding to as well, is it's very difficult for some men and some women too, but mainly men, to see you as what you are today and what they are asking you to be in the business. If you're a leader, that they see you as what you were, they don't necessarily see you as what you are. And so there's a lot of advocating for yourself and negotiating strategically and some other things that need to happen when you know your worth in that moment. That if you have to fight for your place, fight for your place. But they need to see in action that you are a peer in some of that way, because they will continue until they don't. It takes a little time, which is unfair, but it's kind of the way that it is, that it takes time for them to see you as what you are today versus what you've been in the past. So I think it's a barrier that exists that we as women have to fight through. If you're someone that has started in the role that is not the one you are in today and worked your way up, how do you overcome the fact that they have empowered you, they have brought you up, they recognize that you are this person, but do they pour into you in that way? Not always.
So we're coming to the end of our hour, which clearly we can all keep talking. Panelists, Courtney, Jana, Mary Beth, we're going to go into our quick speed round here and getting us thinking about the lens that we take at Behavioral Essentials, in that sense of awareness is the catalyst for all, the catalyst for growth, the catalyst for curiosity, the catalyst for learning, the catalyst for making the impacts that we want to make. So each of you, in a speed round style, please share kind of the action you would recommend to our listeners today on what they can do to further their self-awareness and any resource you would want to suggest to them. Courtney, go.
Oh, ask feedback and accept it to as many people as you possibly can. One, and two, find anything that Brene Brown has ever said and listen to it. True.
Mm-hmm. Jana?
Jill said this earlier about the needing people around us, similar on that same idea of feedback. Interoffice surveys about your leadership can be really important. And especially if you allow someone to do that anonymously, you get the feedback without somebody putting you on the spot. I would also say, in the vein of like some books and things like that, something that really helped me along the way was Mika Brzezinski from the Morning Joe Show wrote a book called Knowing Your Worth and Knowing Your Value. That book was instrumental for me in kind of understanding how to advocate for myself, knowing my worth, fighting for what I need. And if it's not serving you in that way, get out and don't make excuses for it. So that's been incredibly helpful for me. And then I would say one of the number one things that we help everyone with that we coach is putting together a vision. If that is not something that you have done for yourself, you hear about visions for businesses all the time. Write your own personal vision. What does your life look like? Put it in the context of it's December 31st, however far out you can see. And then start to ask yourself the question of, what do I want my life to look like? Not just, this whole idea is the whole person, right? Not just at work, not just at home. What does it look like? For me, it was important for me to get my son off the bus at 3 o'clock every day, and I needed an opportunity to let me do that. I went and sought that. How can you start to let that vision drive some of your decisions, your values, and things like that? Huge advocate for putting a self-vision together.
Wow. Beautifully said, Gianna. I love the vision work that you recommend. And then Courtney, I love the Brene Brown, anything Brene Brown. One of the things that a lot of the topics we're talking about today are addressed in, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the book, but How Women Rise. The 12 habits that hold us back from our next phase or raise or promotion. So I really highly recommend that one because we need strategies and really to-dos, right? A to-do list of things to practice in order to become ready for our next step.
Thank you. And so for us at Behavioral Essentials, we obviously lean into the tools we bring to all of you. So inviting everyone on their journey of self-awareness to explore their blind spots. And the most fun about this is not doing it just on a solo journey of getting your report and thinking, what does that mean? It is getting your blind spotting assessment and then talking to someone about it. So not only are we offering that to everyone listening today, but we're offering a chance to review this with one of our amazing, Mary Beth's got her book, our amazing
Good
female
promo, Mary
coaches.
Beth.
And we encourage you to do that, but we also encourage you to take your assessment and offer it to your colleagues and talk about it together. So just like Courtney said, is going to your team and having your team talk about what you bring to the table and putting that there. Jana talked about her team of 3. Like there's definitely an intimacy at that level of, I'm sure they all know each other very well, but there's us putting language and making it a shared language that's not just Jill judging Jana or Jana judging Jill. So that's the opportunity. And our panelists are absolutely willing to answer any additional questions that might be out there. But thank you for the great hour together. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming.
It for all.